That recording there. Okay, so share my screen. So Wednesday nights, we have been going through a study on the patterns of the Bible that we've been seeing in modern times, looking to the writings of Jewish Messianic Rabbi Jonathan Cahn and some of his thoughts on some scriptures that might tie into some things we're looking, and been having some discussions on that. So before I share my screen on that, I want to share my screen on this. Ta-da! This is a test run. Yeah, to be continued on the different options we've discussed on the logo itself with the color arrangements. Stay tuned for that. But yeah, here we have a test website. There's normal things about us. Let's connect. Yeah, I'd be filling all that stuff and all that stuff. So yeah. So we are moving along, joining the real world. I've never seen.
When you say blue background for the logo or for the whole page? No, for the logo.
Yeah, that'd be pretty. There are different options we're looking at. So yeah. So stay tuned on that. But yeah.
Yeah, so this is just a
Yeah. I've never seen my wife so excited about technology.
Well, it has to say Grace.
Yes.
Somewhere. Oh, it says Grace over there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there is that. So So again, we go to our sources. We scroll up to here to the top. As always, first and foremost, our ultimate authority and source over everything is the Word of God. Final say on everything, but we are having a enjoyable time. I have spending these last several Wednesdays going through and seeing how these things might be playing out in our modern times. And so speaking of modern times, we last left off just last week with an article that I was so happy to share because that's the nerd I am. This article, and that thing keeps popping up and getting in my way here. Get it there. So I wasn't able to share the article last week that was saying, okay, do this login, all that stuff. I wasn't going to waste all your time with that. So I thought what I'll do this week is I'll make sure I come early enough, go ahead and get that all set up and going so we'd be ready to go, right? So I get here this evening, get it all set up, and what does it say? So, courtesy of cell phone, we will now have the article because Eric doesn't take a hint very well. And so here we go. The article was published in the Epoch Times. Article is written by Naveen Athropoli, however that name is pronounced, Athropoli. Yeah, there we go. Published December 6th. Here's the article talking about what's going on in modern times. And we'll tie in the biblical perspective on this. Economist Nouriel Roubini, has warned about an impending crisis in the global economy that policymakers likely won't be able to handle. Following the explosion of leverage, borrowing, and deficits in recent decades, the world economy is now moving toward an unprecedented confluence coming together of financial, debt, and economic crises. Roubini warned in a December 2 article for Project Syndicate. Households, corporations, financial institutions, governments, pension plans, and other entities are now burdened with massive amounts of debt that will only continue to grow as societies age. Total private and public sector debt as a share of GDP, our gross domestic product, rose to 350% in 2021 from 200% in 1999. In the United States, This stands at 420%, while in China, it's at 330%. Short answer, that's not good. The unsustainable debt ratios turned many borrowers, banks, corporations, households, nations, shadow banks, and governments into insolvent zombies. The low interest rates in recent years helped keep this trend alive. Basically, financially speaking, they were dead in the water, but the low interest rates were keeping them dead man walking, keeping them from going kaput and bankrupt. But with the elevated inflation, the financial dawn of the dead has ended, Rubini observes. As the Federal Reserve raises interest rates to combat inflation, the zombies are facing a sharp rise in debt servicing costs, the amount of interest you have to pay to borrow money. Rubini was a senior advisor to Obama-era Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner. Now, since January, the Fed has pushed up its benchmark interest rate to a range of 3.75% to 4% from a range of 0 to 0.25%. That's a big jump they've done. For many, this represents a triple whammy because inflation is also eroding real household income and reducing the value of household assets, such as homes and stocks. So you're bringing in less money and what you have is worth less. The same goes for fragile or over-leveraged corporations, financial institutions, and governments. They face sharply rising borrowing costs, falling incomes and revenues, and the declining asset values all at the same time. So it costs more money to borrow money, you're getting less money in, and what you already have is worth less money. These developments are happening amidst the return of stagflation, a situation of weak economic growth and high inflation. Unlike the 2008 financial crisis and the COVID-19 crisis, bailing out private and public entities will only end up pouring more gasoline on the inflationary fire. What they did to kick the can down the road last time ain't going to work this time. This means there will be a deep, protracted recession on top of an intense financial crisis. The mother of all economic crises looms, and there will be little that policymakers can do about it, Rubini warns. A similar negative prediction for the US economy was also made by Harvard professor Larry Summers in a recent interview with Bloomberg. Summers, who also served as Treasury Secretary under Obama, pointed out it will become much harder to bring inflation down without a recession because at a certain point, consumers will run out of their savings, which will reduce consumption. When you're out of money, you're not spending. This means the economic downturn will be fairly forceful. When the unemployment rate in the United States rises by half a percentage point, it ultimately rises by more than 2 points, Summers said, because once you get into a negative situation, there's an avalanche aspect. I think we have a real risk that's going to happen at some point. So there's some cheery news for us.
That's a visual.
Yeah.
Something to look forward to. Yeah.
So you think man's gotten a little full of himself and in his own way and tried to say, I've got this too many times and stopped doing things in a godly way, and it's not working out too well for him. So, and again, as we've been consistent in saying, whatever's going on around us, we want to be aware, as long as we stay with God and close to him and doing things honorably under him, he's got us covered. And so this isn't a case of panic. This is, for us, this isn't a case of paranoia. This is a case of being aware and prepared and knowing where our priorities are. After all, what was that, Sister Peggy? It's just money, right? Yeah, you know. And so there is that. But let's go to some scripture. Let's go to the book of 1 Kings. Let's take a look at 1 Kings chapter 11. Okay, we can get rid of that one. Go back to here. So 1 Kings chapter 11. Let's look at verse 7. In 1 Kings 11:7, we're told, then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable idol of Moab, on the mountain which is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the detestable idol of the sons of Ammon. Here Solomon, in all his infinite wisdom, towards the end of his life, being distracted by all his wives and concubines and all of their gods, here he is, the king of the Lord's people, son of David, and he's building high places of worship for Chemosh and for Molech. And we've talked a lot about Molech as well as Baal and Ashtoreth, Ishtar, Inanna in these classes. Jonathan Kahn makes the point, Moloch's name makes several appearances here in scripture. When King Solomon falls away from God, he builds high places, altars, and sanctuaries for the foreign gods, and one of them is Moloch, the god of child sacrifice. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Solomon himself, right there. Whoa. No joke. There's good news, though, in the sequel, 2 Kings. Wasn't really a sequel. They were all one book together, and then they just split them out. But anyway. In 2 Kings, let's go to chapter 23. We fast forward quite a bit, 2 Kings 23, verse 10. Talking about this king Josiah and what he did to all this ungodly stuff. So King Josiah, in 2 Kings 23, verse 10, he also defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the sons of Hinnom, that no man might make his son or his daughter pass through the fire for Molech. So he destroyed all that stuff. We've talked about the valley of Hinnom and all that stuff before. So when righteous King Josiah, who is Solomon's descendant, he's 15 generations later, he endeavors to lead his nation back to God, he knows he has to destroy the altars of Molech. That stuff's got to go. So yay, King Josiah, good king. Last place we'll go for this evening for our scripture foundation, Psalm number 106. And this will connect with scriptures we read last week. Psalm 106. We'll get a couple verses here. Let's pick it up in Psalm 106, verse 34. Psalm 106, verse 34 tells us, they did not destroy the peoples as the Lord commanded them when they're supposed to enter the promised land and get rid of those Canaanites who were serving all these other gods. So they did not destroy the peoples as the Lord commanded them, but they mingled with the nations and learned their practices and served their idols, which became a snare to them. They even sacrificed their sons and their daughters to the demons and shed innocent blood, the blood of the sons of their daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan. And the land was polluted with the blood. Thus they became unclean in their practices and played the harlot in their deeds. Wow. I thought Psalms was a book you go to read happy stuff. But Psalms are also, first and foremost, scripture. So there's truth, there's doctrine, there's all sorts of incredible stuff in Psalms, including factual history. And part of the factual history this is what happened with the Lord's people. They did not follow the Lord's command to clear the land of those who were worshiping all these idols. And in fact, they intermingled with them as they settled in there and started worshiping those idols themselves, even to the point of sacrificing their kids to their gods. And in fact, as Psalm says, sacrificing them to demons. The Hebrew word shadim, we mentioned last week. It's mentioned in Deuteronomy 32, verse 17. In all of Hebrew scriptures, that word appears only once more right there in the book of Psalms. So it wasn't just a case of them fashioning things with their hands that are just nothing and then worshiping a whole lot of nothing. No, both Deuteronomy and Psalms confirm there were actual demonic forces behind all this. They were actually worshiping demons. They were actually sacrificing their children to demons. And these were God's people. So yeah, crazy, crazy stuff, huh? So any reactions or thoughts on that? before we leave that and move
I
on to.
don't see how, just back to Solomon, I don't see how he could have done that. This was David's child.
Yeah,
See, I mean, that's terrible.
it is terrible. It's what Solomon's downfall was. He got distracted by his 1,000 wives and concubines, and yeah, can you imagine? A little bit. And setting up places of worship for all of their different gods. And so he was told the kingdom's going to be rent from you, but for David's sake, it won't be in your lifetime. And when Solomon repented, he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, which is a wonderful book about finally getting it in your old age, so what matters and how much of everything else is vanity. So good ending for Solomon, but quite an oof, right there.
You know, he had all his wives and stuff, but I didn't equate Molech with.
Yeah.
With
Notice how we observe in the Bible, polygamy was never a good thing. It never worked. And so, and all those things that came with it. But yeah, it went that far. Absolutely. So, yeah.
Built all those things to please his wives.
Yes.
Is what we believe. Then the ones who were sacrificing their children to their Lord, were they not also Solomon's children?
Oh, I don't know. We don't have that on record, so that's an assumption, and we can't rule it out. I don't know if Solomon would allow his own kids to be sacrificed or not. It could have been. I don't know how far he let it go. If he just said, "Okay, you do your thing over here, you do your thing over there," but we're not told one way or the other. So, but that's a scary possible thought. We can't rule it out either. So yeah. So that brings us to, I'm going to try something here. So folks online, I hope this works for you. For our next video clip, I'm going to try this here. Boom, boom. So to make this one work, I have to stop the share here and then do a different share here and hope this works. So here's our next video clip.
There's an ancient mystery that lies behind everything from 9/11 to the plague of COVID-19 to the forces that are now transforming American culture and world civilization. Are the shakings that have come upon America and the world a sign of approaching judgment? Are we now replaying a mystery that manifested in the last days of ancient Israel and that leads to calamity? Are we running out of time? And what does the mystery reveal concerning what is yet to come? In the time we have, we'll be opening up these mysteries and will reveal the warning contained within them and the key as to what to do in the days ahead. It all began when I was standing at the corner of Ground Zero, and I saw an object there that became the first puzzle piece in an ancient mystery that kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger until I was led to commit it to writing. It became the first book I ever wrote, The Harbinger. It was an ancient mystery of judgment, 9 harbingers or prophetic signs of warning that appeared in the last days of ancient Israel before its destruction, and that were now manifesting on American soil. The biblical warning of a nation heading to judgment. That book, The Harbinger, reveals these things through a narrative of a mysterious man known only as the prophet, and a man he reveals them to named Noriel. The ancient template begins this way. Years before the nation's judgment, a shaking comes upon it, a warning, a wake-up call. It comes in the form of a strike, an enemy strike on the land, an attack in the form of terrorism. It happened in America on September 11th, 2001. And it was that event that began the manifestations of the 9 harbingers of judgment. But what happens after them? Do the harbingers continue? Do new harbingers appear? What happens to the nation? Does it progress to judgment? When I wrote The Harbinger, I knew the mystery wasn't over, but it was only beginning. I knew that one day there would be a sequel, and I held off from writing it for over 8 years, but the mystery of the Harbinger has not stopped. It's continued. In fact, as I reread the book, where it spoke of things to come, I saw that these things were now coming to pass. In the autumn of 2019, as I was praying about what the next book would be, I was strongly led that it was now time for the Harbinger 2. That the coming year, 2020, would see great shakings, dark events, the continuation and manifestation of the mystery that began with the Harbinger and with the events of 9/11. And that I had to write to open it up and to warn those who would hear. I began writing it in January. 2 months later, the shakings began. A plague came to the world and most dramatically to America. And so began the Harbinger 2, that would answer the questions I asked at the start. The revelation comes in 3 parts. The first is called the unrevealed. It opens up the mysteries I held back from revealing when I wrote the Harbinger because they were too big. Mysteries that began with 9/11, but the repercussions of which were affecting us to this day. The second part is called the manifestations. It answers the question, has the mystery continued? Has the template of judgment progressed? And have new harbingers now appeared? And the answer is yes, yes, and yes. And the third part is called the coming. It brings the mystery up to the present time. What has happened to America from the plague that came upon the land, to civil disorder, to cities on fire, the division of American society, and where it is all heading. And is there hope? And if so, what is it? And is there a key to changing the very course of America? Has it manifested before, and can it do so again? And what is the warning and the keys for each of us in the days ahead? Finally, in the Harbinger 2 and in this film, I'll open up a mystery I've kept hidden for over 20 years, something most prophetic, and which I will literally show you for the first time. Now, we can't possibly cover here all the mysteries in the books, but you'll get the revelation in an overall picture. And something I can't do in the books, you'll not only hear of these mysteries, you'll actually see and hear them. First, we must set the stage for the unrevealed, the mysteries from 9/11 that I held back from sharing for years, but which are affecting us to this day. America is a unique civilization in that it was founded after the pattern of ancient Israel. And as with ancient Israel, inasmuch as it followed the ways of God, it was blessed. But ancient Israel fell away from God. The people drove him out of their culture and their public squares. They replaced him with idols and foreign gods. They descended into sexual immorality. They persecuted those who still upheld the ways of God. And they ended up sacrificing their own children on the altars of their new gods. And then came the first shaking, the first strike and warning of coming judgment. How did it come? The cities of the ancient world were walls, and the gate of the city thus became critical. It was a place through which everything came in and out, the people, the trade, the wares, the merchandise. The gates of the ancient cities of Babylon, Uruk, Nineveh, embodied the splendor and majesty of the city and the kingdom to which it led. And when judgment came, it began at the gate. Specifically, it began with the appearance at the gate of the enemy, who would lay siege to the gate and seek to break it down. Judgment begins at the gate. As it is written in the scriptures, and the enemy shall besiege you in all your gates. The enemy shall distress you in your gates. America has no walls of stone to protect it, but it does have a gate through which its multitudes have come and gone, along with trade, wares, merchandise, a gate that embodies its majesty. America's gate is and has always been New York City. the ancient mystery. Judgment begins at the gate. So the nation's first strike of judgment must begin there. So 9/11 had to begin in New York City at the gate. And so it began with the appearance of the enemy at the gate. But there was more to it. You see, the gate of America isn't simply New York, but specifically the passageway of New York that leads up the Hudson River, and more specifically, the passage flanked on one side by the Statue of Liberty, America's gateway in Ellis Island, the portal through which millions enter the land, and on the other side, the island of Manhattan. Where did 9/11 take place? At that exact point, at that exact gateway, as both planes flew over those very waters, the gateway of the gate of America. Judgment begins at the gates. But there's another sign that manifests at the beginning of a nation's judgment. The pride and glory of an ancient civilization were embodied in its towers. So it's written in Isaiah of the day of calamity. The judgment shall come upon everything that is high and lifted up, against every high tower. Where in America are there more high towers than anywhere else? New York City. New York itself is the nation's high tower. And 9/11 came against the nation's high towers. It's a foundational and classic sign of national judgment, the fall of the high towers. So on September 11th, the World Trade Center, the embodiment of American greatness, fell to the earth. But there was more. You see, in the ancient city, the two symbols came together, because at each side of the city gate, there often stood towers. The towers would serve to strengthen the gate and as stations for the city's watchmen. So the ancient gate was flanked by two towers. The two towers were identical. They were twin towers. And so on 9/11, the calamity came not only to America's gate, but to its towers, and specifically its two twin towers that stood at its gate.
And we'll pause that there. So yes, this is the film. Those of us who were able to go see this in the theater. And so we are at that time where it would be appropriate to break it up and bring that into our class discussion as we've been going through these things. So any initial reactions or questions for that video clip, now that we've gone over some things and now we're seeing that again for those who've seen the whole film? All good?
Well, we watched that other one, which seemed like it was just like this one here. So it seems like there's a lot of repetition.
This is taking us from that one forward.
Okay.
This is going from 9/11 to COVID.
Okay.
And it's bringing out things about 9/11 that weren't mentioned in the earlier film, but that I brought out in our class discussion.
I guess I see a lot of overlap.
Good,
Yeah.
because sometimes information can be overwhelming, so
Yeah.
sometimes it helps. And that's why it helps to kind of overlap and repeat and connect and make sure where it's all following the train here.
Because I remember going to the theater.
Yeah.
Watching.
So we'll stop that share and go back to this share. Okay, so all good there. So what do towers have to do with where we are at today? Because 9/11 was 20 years ago, right? Well, just as not all walls are physical, an example of New York City, not all not all towers are either. So this just came out on the 11th, just the other day, The Great Reset Towers in Babel by Will Alexander. So here are these thoughts and see what you think. In Noah's generation, the book of Genesis records, mankind had utterly corrupted God's way. They were filled with violence, greatly wicked, their thoughts and imaginations being only evil continually. We all remember reading that in Genesis. So God warned Noah of a flood that would destroy man and alter the earth as it existed until that time. Moved with fear, Noah built an ark, warned his generation about things not as seen as yet, from Hebrews 11:7. They didn't listen. The flood came and went. God instructed Noah to be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, exactly as he did the first man, Adam. Noah and his family were to be the beginning of a regenerated and repeopling of the earth, the planet's first and greatest ever reset. Now that's a reset right there. God promised Noah, his sons, and every living creature for perpetual generations that he would never destroy all flesh or the earth again with a flood. The reminder, his bow in the clouds. Amen. So far, so good, right? But many came to doubt that promise, according to Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, in an account of a biblical story in his Antiquities of the Jews from 93 AD. Thanks to the tyrannical influence of Noah's great-grandson Nimrod, Josephus wrote that multitudes were ill-instructed into having contempt for God. Repeating a narrative that submission to God was cowardice, Nimrod used exaggerated fears of a catastrophic flood to harness his power, build a tower whose top may reach to heaven, Genesis 11:4. If he should have a mind to drown the world again, Josephus wrote of Nimrod's intent, mankind would stand a better chance by working together rather than scattering to repeople the earth. For that, he, Nimrod, would build a tower too high for the waters to be able to reach, and that he would avenge himself of God for destroying their forefathers. Now, pause here. We know what God said. They knew what God said. Either Nimrod believed God and was telling the people a lie just to accomplish his power grab, which is very likely, or people just didn't trust God and got scared in their own humanity and all that. Either way. So it worked. No pains were spared to create cutting-edge technologies. Burnt bricks cemented together with mortar made of bitumen to build a tower designed to avert a climate disaster that, as God had promised, was never going to happen. The massive building project only stopped after God confused their language. The ancient skyscraper, a true marvel of that day, came to symbolize a giant middle finger to the Creator. Now we fast forward to 2022. Despite the near magical advance of human invention, the same rebel spirit that inspired the tower in the ancient city of Babel, eventually Babylon, that's a mistake, it's actually an Eridu, thrives today. That's a common misconception that Babel became Babylon. Another story for another time. But the spirit is still alive and well. Unelected global elites using fear and force have big plans for the world. And unless I missed it, submission to God is not in them. Elite revolutionaries are working feverishly on cutting-edge technologies to avert a flood of climate catastrophes that more than likely will never happen. To save the planet, they've turned to the gods of science and money. We are on a fast track to climate disaster, said Antonio Guterres, the United Nations General Secretary, in a video message to a panel on climate change in New York in April. Major cities underwater, unprecedented heat waves, terrifying storms, widespread water shortages, the extinction of 1 million species of plants and animals. And this is not fiction or exaggeration. This is what science tells us will result from our current energy policies. This is a climate emergency. Stop me if you've heard that before. Leaders in governments, businesses, global institutions who believe the planet has a better chance by working together have created a highly influential global movement to reconstruct a better world, the Great Reset. Thanks to technology, the movement towers over anything the planet has ever seen except the flood in a global effort to remake the world. These elites make up the world's largest banks, pension funds, insurance companies, asset managers, and international organizations like the World Economic Forum, which partnered with the United Nations in 2019 to implement its 17 Sustainable Development Goals for Agenda 2030. Today, hundreds of the world's largest corporations in finance, technology, media, credit cards, energy, food, heavy industry, manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, consulting, consumer goods. They've signed pledges to be strategic partners in this movement. Doing voluntarily what governments by law cannot do. Unelected elites have implemented a scoring system called ESG, environmental, social governance, that audits and measures the value of private companies, even whole countries, based primarily on their performance on climate change, social justice, and a more inclusive capitalism. That means working to disinvest in fossil fuels, cutting gas-powered cars, subsidizing wind, solar, and electric cars. It means fighting for social justice, racial and gender equity, diversifying corporate boards by race and gender through DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion training, taking a stand on transgender rights, voting laws, abortion, and gun control. Governments, universities, private institutions have become so malignant with these ideas that the simplest things we know to do to get back to normal, past COVID, post George Floyd, have never been more frustratingly difficult. But normal is not part of the plan. Many of us are pondering when things will return to normal, wrote Klaus Schwab, founder of the World Economic Forum, in his book, COVID-19, The Great Reset. The short answer is never. Nothing will ever return to the broken sense of normalcy that prevailed before the crisis, because the coronavirus pandemic marks a fundamental inflection point in our global trajectory. Basically, things have changed and ain't going back, he says. The COVID pandemic, all the record suffering and death that came with it, is never ending because people like Schwab use it as a pretext to accelerate a reset of the world, a time for reinvention when many things will change forever. A new world will emerge, Schwab wrote, the contours of which are for us both to imagine and to draw. The future is not just happening, he said at a Davos meeting in May. The future is built by us. We have the means to improve the state of the world. It would be laughable if it weren't for the fact that Schwab and a cabal of hydra-headed central planners have spared no expense to reimagine the world. The sustainability revolution is the single largest business and investing opportunity in the entire history of the world, said climate crusader Al Gore, co-founder of the $36 billion investment firm Generation Investment Management. That's not fiction. In a 2021 Bloomberg report, ESG assets were tracked to surpass $50 trillion by 2025, more than a third of the projected $140 trillion in total global assets under management. That's how much money is involved in this. That's how big this is. What the globalists and Joe Biden see as an incredible transition, people with common sense see global elites using a common woke language to create mass confusion. Modern Towers of Babel, gender confusion, border confusion, confusion over fighting crime, energy confusion, confusion over race, confusion about history, confusion about the Constitution, the rule of law, climate confusion, confusion over food production, supply chains, economic confusion, confusion over the legitimacy of the Judeo-Christian ethic, confusion over the meaning of once settled things, like the rainbow. Synchronized at a moment in history to deliberately demolish norms at the heart of Western democracies, global do-gooders have unleashed a brand of violence, wickedness, and imaginations reminiscent of the days of Noah and Nimrod. While efforts to oppose this stuff should be big, bold, and relentless and never-ending, at this rate, may require another divine intervention to break up the cabal of ill-instructed false prophets who toy around with the lives of billions as if they are gods, which they are not. So let me move this over here, back to there. And so all of that to say that the spirit of Nimrod is alive and well today, and very, very active, and very, very persistent and very, very effective. And the things that are going on around us are not random, they're not by accident, and it's all part of a movement away from God to build a tower of man. In fact, the very intention is to depart from God, just as the Tower of Babel's intention was to depart from God. God said to scatter. No, we're going to come together as man and elevate ourselves and do our thing. And so that's exactly what we see happening, and that's what's going on in the world around us. So does anyone have any reactions to that, thoughts on that, questions on that? Kind of, does that fit with what you've been seeing or hearing? Sister Minnie.
From what I can read, I have seen, program cabal, it is the root of the very rich, not just in America, in all these countries, not every country, some countries are very poor, but the very rich in those countries, they want global cooperation, and they want everybody to be, you erase your borders, we all live in the same world, and we're all going to be ruled by these people who are already rich and in powerful positions. And they wanted to say that way, they don't want a middle class, they want the lower class to serve them and do what they say. And for me, that just sounds like some of the old kings in the Bible who were wicked, and they oppressed the smaller people. They didn't want these servants, and they wanted to have all the money and everything coming into them. It sounds like that to me. And here's what they did: they crossed their borders and tried to take over other countries. It's all through the Old Testament.
Yeah, there's nothing new under the sun. And that's why we have here at Federal Hall, where George Washington was inaugurated president, and he gave his inaugural speech, where we invoked God's blessing on our nation, put ourselves under his protection. And he also gave the warning for you should depart from that. And here he is overlooking the New York Stock Exchange, which, as we see, as a result of September 11th, was severely affected after the towers fell. So let's actually do this. Go to here. So picking up where we last left off with 9/11, as we're going through the events, the stock market was closed on September 11th when everything hit. They kept it, it was a Tuesday. They kept it closed for the whole week, reopened on Monday, September 17th. And this is in a Sabbath year. Every 7 years on the Jewish calendar, from about September, October to September, October, is every 7 years is a Sabbath year. A year that's supposed to be for nations who have put themselves under God, supposed to be a year of rest and reflection under God. But when we deny God or try to move away from God, we find that our sources of sustainment and the things that we look to, we find those suffer loss. And so too, you know, it turns out it's not just money to some of these folks after all.
I think when you start talking about biblical prophecy, you know, you're dealing with people that believe it, or they don't believe it, or they kind of believe it but don't think it's going to apply to them. Right?
You're right.
I mean, very
well said.
I mean, seriously, I don't think the average everyday person
Oh, no.
even thinks that.
Of course not.
Eric, I've never heard of a Sabbath year until you started teaching this class. I've never heard of Jubilee years until you started teaching this class. It was just not in my purview, you know. So when we do these things, I mean, and you know, you're bringing out so much that is just, it's just on this huge scope, right? I mean,
You're talking about the whole world.
yeah, you're talking about the world. I mean, this is why I think that, I mean, how do you even begin to, you know, to digest some of this?
That's why I have some overlap and repeating.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that was.
No, you're fine. No, you're fine. It's true. You're right.
Mind. Okay, wait.
This sounds familiar, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm different books from fun than my best book, so, yeah, I've got my book, anyway. So, but seriously, I don't think most people just want to know what the heck does the price of tea in China have to do with me, right? They only look at things so far as, okay, well, I got to pay the rent next week, or, oh my goodness, my kids have to have braces. Gotta take the cat to the vet, which, speaking of which, I stepped on the cat and scratched me today. So it's hard for me to, when we're talking about biblical prophecy, it's really hard for me to digest a lot of this and to try to think about, there's nothing that I can do about it, right? There's nothing there's nothing in the world that I can do that's going to change what God has laid out for the world and for his people.
You can't change it, but aren't you asking yourself, how does this affect me?
Well, yeah, well, that was my point, unless it's, like I say, unless it's affecting me, I'm not thinking about the stock market, unless it affects my retirement. Because normally
Pension plans.
that's how people react. They don't react to things until it personally affects them.
Mhm.
Otherwise, they don't have any, any.
And how many people were personally affected by 9/11 when it hit, all of a sudden got religion and it lasted 3 weeks. And then back to their lives.
Well, and now our kids, don't even
Yeah.
come, like you talk about that, how kids today don't, some of them weren't even born then. So to them, that's ancient history,
Just for perspective for us, Caleb and brother Tim were like a year old.
yeah. So it's not,
But that's
that's like World War II for us, or
Yeah.
Korea for our age group.
Yeah.
I don't, we, at DAR and UDC, we do the honor flights where we send the veterans to Washington DC to see the monument. Well, they do World War II veterans, and these fellas are 99 years old, I mean, they're old guys, Yeah. But that generation, the greatest generation is slowly passing away, so it's a wonderful thing that we do, but in a lot of ways, it's not. Alyssa's generation's not gonna even be able to think about that.
And they're the greatest generation, and they served America when America was at its peak. 1945, the end of World War II, was a Sabbath year. The Victory March was on the last day of the Sabbath year, at the end of World War II, literally. And so these things have a biblical spiritual connection that gets missed. And it's not so much about not being able to change the whole world. It's about our world and what the Lord would have for us in our world. And our world's part of the big world around us. And so awareness is one thing, but then bringing it home to, okay, as we deal with these things that are going on, as we see there's more to the story of 9/11, when you see all the scriptures and all the details that fill out, remember everything we saw with the 6-day war. And all that filled out there. There are so many things that, how many coincidences does it take? Even with the Stonewall riots, how many coincidences does it take?
Because all this stuff is like conspiracy theory stuff. I mean, at least that's what it would be labeled.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like say, because then you have the people that don't believe in biblical prophecy. So to them, it's just myths and fairy tales anyway.
And that's the beauty of free will.
But
here's reality. I believe in Santa Claus. That doesn't make him real. I don't believe in Jesus. That doesn't make him not real. So it's all about awareness and then personal choices. And so my job is to present things and provide the awareness, and it's up to each and every one of us how we're going to have our personal choices affected by these things we see from the Bible, from these Bible patterns that are still happening in our lifetimes. All of us here were alive for 9/11. And as we see, there are some Bible patterns that are happening with this and bringing us from that to COVID and where we're going from here. Yes.
We know that Jesus said, I don't want you to give me.
Yeah, Paul too.
You know when the red sky means there's some understanding that. But also Jesus quoted old scripture a lot. And he said, I don't want you to be ignorant.
Mhm.
So what it's really telling us is pay attention because this is coming. Because what he was quoting in the Old Testament was past. What we're looking at in the Old Testament is past. But Jesus said, pay attention to what's coming.
Yep.
When you see that red flag, you know, he said, you know, because he told you know this. That's what he told the disciples. You know this. So look, and he gave them some things about what's going to happen when. What's going to happen when.
Yeah.
When time's coming. And the we today, so much of our society just, well, you know, that was in the Bible. But just doesn't affect us today. But Jesus said it does.
Yeah, Brother Joe.
Yeah, the thing I was just saying, there's, to me, there's, to all of us, to no surprise what's going on.
Amen, brother.
It's already been lost.
You got it.
You know, next, now we just have to learn.
Better related to the younger generation.
The Lord teaches us.
Yeah,
How to go through these things.
absolutely. And I'm so glad you said that because time moves in a straight line. We understand the past through the scriptures. We understand how it brought us to our present, and we see it's still connected to that. Then we see where it's going in the future. Now, we might not know specific days or times. We don't care about that, but we know the patterns. We see the way things are playing out, and we know how to live our lives so that we're covered. As we're winding down here for this evening, we'll close with this slide right here. And it's so important, like Brother Joe said, that we recognize these things so that we know what to do, so that we know how to draw close to God as these different things play out. So what we saw play out here with this graph here, here's we've got,
The bottom of it.
yeah, so 1996, 1998, 2000, 2002, 2003. This is the NASDAQ. So you see, here's this line showing 9/11. So as the Sabbath year begins, the peaks of Wall Street begin to descend, to be brought low. And as the Sabbath year reaches its last climactic day, the lines dramatically plummet. As mentioned earlier, when the stock market reopened on Monday, September 17th, that was the last and final day of the Sabbath year, April 29. And so the stock market crash was on the end of the Sabbath year, the day that financial accounts are to be cleared out and reckoned. And so the day given in the Bible, thousands of years ago, thousands of miles away, is the day this happened in America 20 years ago. And
It seems like 9/11 was obviously significant, to us as a country, but Jonathan Kahn talks about it like this was like a big start of something, or this was a big focus, or it came to a point here.
well,
right?
Israel had the warning shot when Assyria attacked them
Yeah,
in 732 BC, and they had their vow of defiance in response to it instead of repentance. And so it was a few years after that Israel was wiped off the earth as a nation. So same thing for us. This was a warning because we have fallen away from God, have built up our towers. And so we see here, wrapping up this here. On 9/11, Wall Street shut down, reopened September 17th, the Shemitah's climactic last day, the first day that Wall Street bears the financial impact of 9/11. The greatest stock market point crash in history is the reflection of 9/11 and in the financial realm. The two events are bound. So at the climax of the 2001 Sabbath year come two falls. The most colossal stock market collapse in Wall Street history and the most colossal physical collapse in American history as the two towers come crumbling down to the earth. The imploding and the crashing of the financial realm and the imploding and crashing in the physical realm join together in the letting fall of the Sabbath year. So we'll close there with that, and we'll start moving forward from the reopening of the stock market after 9/11 and getting ready for the Sabbath year of 2007, 2008, and the connection with the housing crisis and how that falls right into all of
I thought
this.
we talked about that.
No, we haven't gotten there yet. We're in 2001 still.
Oh,
We make reference to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've made reference to it, and we've done some different things, and there've been some video clips that made some connections, but we're gonna, walk all through that. But again, the main thing with all of this is that number one, God is in control. Even when people, I love Revelation 17:17. That God's putting it into their heart to have a common purpose. So by executing their plan, they're really executing God's plan. And it's all bringing things about as he had intended, and nothing surprising him. This is an opportunity for us to be aware for our own selves and not to be clueless, but it's also for our own awareness to share with other people that this isn't just random. Things aren't just happening for no reason. And this is an opportunity. This is God knocking on the door saying, hey, there's my word that I gave you that is connected to what's happening around you. And I'm doing this to show you that I care about you. I'm interested in you. I desire you. I want you. Come follow me. Come be with me so that I can keep you covered as these different things end up happening. And we can be with him and under his hedge of protection rather than we see the results when the hedge is removed. So with that, any final thoughts, questions, observations on the stock market? And I don't, yeah.
Well, I just want to say, and I heard this, not originally with me, but I had heard it said before that a lot of people live their lives as though they live in that, they live as though God is in a broken down Ford on running around the bad road.
I like the saying.
Nothing to do with what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. Some have the idea that God, wound up the world like a clock, set it in motion, then he's just kicking back doing his own thing. No, he's intimately acquainted. In fact, the Bible even says in Romans 8 how the world yearns for him, like a woman working to give birth. The world travails in anticipation of his coming and the restoration that he's going to bring about. So that's good, exciting stuff that we have to look forward to. And the Lord is, again, doing all this so that we see he's there, he's aware, he's involved, and he cares, and he's trying to bring us into his goodness and save us from the harm that happens outside of his presence. So appreciate that very much. So we shall go ahead and stop our share for this evening and stop our recording for this evening.